Hello and welcome to Creating Disciples with me, Austin Roberts. We are so excited to have you join us today as we are going to be taking a look at a story from the beginning of the life of Christ here on earth. He was born as a baby in a manger in Bethlehem, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the people surrounding that event. Some people you may not know well, and some maybe that you don't know quite as well. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope the Lord blesses you through this message. I don't know about you, but it's always interesting to see how people react to different things. You know, sometimes people react in ways that we expect, and sometimes people react in ways that we do not expect whatsoever. I remember back in college, I took a speech class. Now, as part of this class, we were required as the students to give a few different speeches throughout our quarter. We had to give a persuasive speech, a speech that was informational, and we had to work on these things and write them up and turn in outlines and manuscripts and grade our fellow students and all those different things. Well, one of the speeches that we had to do was a little different from all of those speeches. One of the speeches was called an impromptu speech. And the way it happened was we had to get up there and give a speech essentially in that manner, impromptu. So what the teacher did was she took a hat, and in the hat she wrote down a bunch of different random topics, put them in the hat, and then just passed it around the class. And it was each student had to draw out 3 topics and then had a minute to decide which one they liked, and then 3 minutes to prepare something to say. Then once we got up on that stage, we had a minute and a half to say what we'd prepared. So truly an impromptu speech. And as you can imagine, you get a little nervous or something like that. You don't know what you're going to speak about, and then once you get up there, you're a little shaky. So as it went, the hat went around the class, and each student gave their speech, and finally the hat made its way around a few rows, and it was passed to me. Well, I got that hat. I drew out 3 topics, and I looked at them for a minute, returned 2 to the hat, and then took the 1. Now, I remember very vividly what the topic said. And it was written there on that piece of paper, and it said that I had to explain to the class why the platypus was my favorite animal. And so I sat there for 3 minutes and thought of as many different things as I could possibly think of and tried to organize myself in my mind there. And finally, it was time. So I went up to the stage. I stood there in front, and I began to deliver this speech. Now, to be honest with you, I don't remember precisely what I said, but I believe I got up there and I said something along the lines of, for some of you, your favorite animal may be a dog, and for others, it might be a cat. But I think the best animal in the world is the platypus. And I don't know if it was the way I said it or what I had said or what it was, but the entire class just burst out laughing. And it wasn't kind of that chuckle that just kind of rolls through a crowd and dies out fairly quickly. They were laughing hard. They were laughing so hard, in fact, that I didn't know if I'd forgotten to put pants on that day or something. I was so surprised. And to be honest with you, an experience like that can be a little unnerving. You ever go up on stage and you say something that you expect to be funny and nobody laughs? Or what's even harder is you get up there and you say something that you didn't think was funny and everybody laughs. Well, that's kind of the experience I had that day. I had this reaction that was completely unexpected on my part. And I finally made my way through that minute and a half there, and people were laughing and laughing the whole time. And I thought, going into that speech, I might get a few chuckles here and there, but I did not expect the whole class to laugh the whole time. It was an experience for me that was unexpected, to say the least. Well, I don't know about you, but I've had a few unexpected reactions throughout my life, and maybe it's been the same for you. Well, today we're going to be looking at a text where there are a few major players. And in this text, each of the major players has an opportunity to react in a different way. And each of the major players will react, perhaps in ways that we expect, perhaps in ways that we don't expect. So I'm going to invite you to open with me. We're going to open to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. Now, we're going to be looking at some of the major players we see here surrounding the birth of Jesus. And there are going to be three major players in particular. But we'll get into that in a few moments. So let's read Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to begin there in verse 1. Matthew writes this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." So, like I said, we have some major players here in this text. We have, in fact, three players, three groups, I suppose, that react in this text. First, we have King Herod. He is a major player in this text. Secondly, we have the teachers of the law and the scribes. Now, we don't talk about them very much, but as you will come to see, they do indeed play a part here. And then third, and the people we probably talk about the most, are the Magi, those from the east. So we've got three major players here. One, we have King Herod. Two, we have the teachers of the law, the scribes. And then three, we have the wise men or the Magi. Now, we're going to begin with the first player here, and that is King Herod. Now, we have King Herod referred to a few times throughout Scripture, and it's actually a few different King Herods. But scholars believe that the King Herod that we have here is King Herod the Great. Now, as we talk about King Herod, and as we talk about these other players, I'm going to be relying on the scholarship primarily of William Barclay, a well-known Scottish scholar who's written commentary material, great commentary material, in fact. So for the historical context and for the things we're going to see here, he is the one on whom I will rely a great deal. So first we have King Herod the Great. Now, because of what King Herod does here in the scriptures, here in the Bible, he gets a pretty bad reputation. And that is certainly deserved at some level. But on the other hand, he did some great things, and he doesn't have as good of a reputation, perhaps, as he should. You see, King Herod was great for a few different reasons. First, let's talk about who he was. King Herod was first appointed governor there, and then he was eventually appointed king by the Roman Empire. Now, King Herod himself was not entirely Jewish. He was also Idumean, and he was a governor, he was a king, he was a great builder, and the Romans really liked Herod because Herod kept the peace in that part of the world. And it was a part of the world there that could be filled with turmoil and tension fairly often. But the Romans liked Herod because he ruled, and he ruled well. He kept the peace, and he kept people from fighting. You see, if you know the geography of Israel, you see that Israel is at a bit of a crossroads. To the north and then to the east, if you go over that way, you have Rome eventually, and then you have Greece, and you have Syria and Assyria, and you've got all these different nations, and Cyprus and so forth. And then, if you look to the east, you have Babylon and Assyria and all those things. And then if you go south, you have Egypt and other nations. Well, as you can imagine, being there at a crossroads, you might encounter a lot of fighting because it was a strategically good place to be. You could levy taxes on people who were coming through, and you could do a lot of different things. But Herod was good. He kept the peace. Secondly, he was a great builder. So, a few years ago, our family had the opportunity to visit the Holy Lands. And during our trip through the Holy Lands, one of the places we visited was Masada. Now, Masada is an interesting place. We went there on a day when it was blazing hot. So we got in this tram, went up to Masada, and we had the opportunity to kind of tour around and see the place. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what Masada is. Masada is one of the places that Herod the Great built. Now, it's built on the top of this plateau that would have been tremendously difficult to build on, and it would have taken him years to finish this palace. But he did it. And he built Masada, and he built this palace, and it is a tremendous feat. But as you walk through, it's interesting to note all the different things he had done there. See, he had put in effective plumbing. He had put in running water. He had even put in saunas that could be heated in different ways. So Masada truly is incredible. But I suppose what the most interesting thing is that when the Roman Empire was trying to conquer Masada, the historian Josephus kind of tells the story. And it took 15,000 Romans a long, long time to conquer under 1,000 Jews. And it took them a long time because of the way Masada was fortified. Once again, it sat on the top of this plateau, and no one could get to it up there. It would have been very, very difficult. And so they put it under siege, and it took years to bring it down. Because the Jews would just sit there on top, and it couldn't be broken. And when the Romans finally broke it, the people inside were dying and starving because they'd been up there for so long. So Herod built this place, Masada. In fact, I would encourage you to perhaps get on the internet and just Google Masada and read a little bit about it and look at the photos. And you'll see what I mean of what type of incredible feat this would have been to build. In fact, it would be tremendously difficult to build up there today. And you can just imagine what it would have taken Herod to build up there at that time. So not only does Herod keep the peace, he's also a phenomenal builder, and that's one of the things that he is known for. Now, another thing about Herod that is great about him is he was, in fact, incredibly generous. And he was there at a time when people were very poor. In fact, there were moments during his reign where he just canceled the taxes. He didn't collect taxes. And he even went further. He would take gold from his own personal treasury, money he had, his own money, and he would buy corn, grain for the poorest of the poor. So Herod gets this reputation, perhaps, that is a little unfair because he did and has done some wonderful things for the people there, for the Jews there. Now, despite all these things, Herod does get this bad reputation, and we know why. Herod had this one downfall that brought him to his knees. You see, Herod was incredibly paranoid. He lived a life of fear. He was always afraid that somebody was coming for his throne. He was always afraid of that. In fact, he was so afraid that he killed many, many people. He killed his own family members. He killed one of his wives. He killed many of his sons. He killed many of his closest friends and allies because he was afraid that they were coming for his throne. He was afraid that they would kill him, take the crown, and rule the land. In fact, he was so afraid that some scholars and biblical theologians believe that Herod may have even been a paranoid schizophrenic. That's how incredibly afraid Herod always was. And so, that's the Herod we have today. So, once again, let's take a look at this text here and see what Herod does. He asks the Magi there, "Go to Bethlehem, and when you come back, report to me where this child is so that I too may worship him." Now, we don't see it particularly in this part of the text, but we see later on that Herod goes and he kills all of the baby boys that are 2 years old and younger. So that is one of the reactions that we have here. Herod has this reaction of fear. He fears what is going to happen. He is afraid. He is scared. even though it is just a baby. That's it. This baby presents really no threat to Herod physically. But this child that has just been born, presents a threat that could bring Herod down. In fact, if you think about it, during the Christmas season, this baby in Bethlehem that has just been born perhaps presents a threat to you. Perhaps you work somewhere. Maybe you're an accountant. Maybe you work in finance. And you've been doing your work as you always do, and you've been a little dishonest, perhaps. You've been moving some of the numbers around, doing some things that if you were caught for it would be illegal, but you've gotten a little comfortable because you've been doing it for so long and no one has noticed. But despite that, this Christmas, there's a baby born in Bethlehem who threatens that lifestyle, who threatens what you're doing. Or maybe your story is different. You go to work, and there's this person at work, and you've kind of been seeing this person behind your spouse's back. Your spouse doesn't know, but you've been seeing this person for a few months, and you begin to become a little comfortable with that. You kind of like it, actually. But then the Christmas season rolls around, and there is a baby born in Bethlehem that threatens that way of life. And this baby will grow up one day and say things like, listen, you can't do stuff like that. And it threatens that way of life. And it's the same for Herod. Herod goes around killing almost indiscriminately despite the good things he has done. And this baby that is born in Bethlehem will grow up one day and threaten that very way of life. And so Herod reacts as someone who is scared, someone who is full of fear, someone who reacts violently. That's one way we can react. But we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the second group of players. And that is the chief priests and the teachers of the law. This is probably the group that we know the least about. But let's see what they do. If you remember in the text, Herod consults them and he says, tell me about this Messiah. And that's what they do. They consult the Old Testament there, and then they read him something. They read him this thing, and I believe it comes from the book of Micah. It says, but you, Bethlehem, the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. And that's it. And so the second reaction here is one of indifference. They just don't seem to care. Many years ago, my favorite football team, the Dallas Cowboys, had a wide receiver play for them by the name of Michael Irvin. And Irvin played for the Cowboys during some years where they were very, very good and they were winning Super Bowls. But Irvin had also played in Dallas for some years where they were really, really bad. They were losing a lot of games every season. They were awful. Well, at one point during Irvin's tenure there, the ownership and the head coaching changed and things looked like they were going to get better. And the new ownership there in Dallas had hired a new coach by the name of Jimmy Johnson. And Johnson went to Irvin because Johnson had in fact coached Irvin in college at the University of Miami where they had won a national championship together. And Irvin said that during his years there in Dallas where they had been so bad, he would go back to his locker room after games where they had lost and lost and lost, and he would almost cry. And he said he would have teammates and other players come up to him and kind of pat him on the back and say, listen, Michael, it's all right. Just come collect your check on Monday and back at it again next week. Well, Johnson, the new coach, approached him and asked him who were the players they should keep and who were the players that needed to go. And Irvin said he busted out that list of players that had come to him with that kind of reaction and said, oh, just collect your game check on Monday. And he said, listen, these guys here, they don't care. They're indifferent. They're just here to collect the check. They've got to go. And Johnson made some changes around that place, and the Cowboys got good. And they would go on to win a lot of games over the next several years. But it's that attitude of indifference, the one that those chief priests and the teachers of the law have. The one that is perhaps the most likely that we will have. It's probably the most natural for us to react this way and just not care. But then we have a third group. And so we're going to go back to the text and read about this third group a little more. This group is the Magi. So once again, Matthew chapter 2, this time we'll read in verse 9. It says this: After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. So here we have this third group of players, the Magi. And they go and they react entirely differently. In fact, they worship Jesus and they give him 3 gifts. They give him 3 gifts of great meaning and significance. So we got these 3 gifts. First, they give gold. Now, for a new family that's just had a child and perhaps, is kind of tight there on the budget, gold would have been a tremendously good gift because gold had a lot of value. Just as it does today, gold is expensive. And that is a gift fit for a king. What else would you give a king but gold? And so that's the first gift they give, and it comes with great and deep meaning. But then they give a second gift, and they give the gift of frankincense. And frankincense is an incense that you would burn in the temple. It's a gift, in fact, not so much fit for a king, but more fit for a priest. And Jesus is not only a king, but he is the priest, the high priest. And so that is another gift that is very, very appropriate for Jesus at that time. And frankincense also would have been expensive, not something that would have come cheap, so it would have helped that family. And maybe at some point when they went to visit the temple or when they went to sacrifice, they would have burned that and thought of those Magi that had come from the east so far and had worshiped Jesus. So that's the second gift, another very appropriate gift in frankincense. But then we have a third gift, and this third gift would have seemed unusual. This gift is myrrh. And myrrh is not like gold, and myrrh is not like frankincense. Myrrh is, in fact, an embalming fluid, something you would use at the time of death. And so to get that gift, no doubt for Mary and Joseph, would have been a little strange. They would have thought, myrrh, why myrrh? Why bring this to a child, someone who has just begun their life, who isn't close to ending their life? Well, again, an appropriate gift, although maybe nobody in that room truly understood the gravity of what was going on. So then we have myrrh. And I suppose you could say it's a bit of a foreshadow of what is to come. Because this baby, although no one knows it yet, will grow up to become Jesus, the Messiah. He will grow up to become the greatest preacher who ever preached and the greatest teacher who ever taught, the greatest doctor who ever lived. He healed the blind and the sick and the deaf and the mute. He even raised the dead. He will grow up to become the King of Kings, and he'll grow up to become the Lord of Lords. He is the hinge of history. He is the beginning and the end and everything in the middle. And he will one day die a violent and gruesome death, and he will lay at rest for 3 days. But then at the end of the 3 days, he will rise once again in an act that will be unparalleled in history. No one before him, during his life, or since him will have ever done something so great. To come and seek and to save the lost like you and like me. And in his death and in his resurrection, everything will change. And even though maybe not many during that period of time will have heard of it, the movement he will begin will grow from something oh so small, just a dozen, just the disciples, to billions upon billions of people on this earth. It is a movement that once again is unparalleled through history. The love of Jesus Christ will grow and it will spread like wildfire among his believers and ultimately to those who have never actually met him. And so when we think about that gift of myrrh, perhaps to the Magi who were there, and to Mary and to Joseph and to Jesus, they would have looked at that and they would have thought, that's strange. Myrrh is a gift for someone who is dead, an embalming fluid. And yet you bring it at this time where he has just been born? And to them, they may not know this yet. But out of the three gifts, perhaps it is the most appropriate gift. Because he will die. And it will be a terrible thing. But he will rise again. And he will come to save you, and he will come to save me, and he will come to save everybody in between. And that is the third reaction we have here. We have a reaction of worship and of reverence and of giving the best gifts that they could find and they could have. Perhaps even unbeknownst to themselves, the type of gifts they were giving. But that's what they do. So here we have the three different reactions. On the one hand, we have Herod the Great. He has a reaction of fear and violence. And he just kills those children, and he's afraid of Jesus because of the threat that he might present on Herod's way of life. Secondly, we have the reaction of indifference. The chief priests, the teachers of the law, they're asked to tell Herod, what does the Messiah mean? Where will he come? And they do that. They open up the Bible, they read that text in Micah, and then they just go about their lives. They're not mentioned again there in the text. And then thirdly, we have the Magi. They have come from oh so far. Some estimates say they even spent years traveling to see Jesus. And then they come, and then they bow down and worship him and give the best of gifts that they could find. These are not gifts that they just picked up on the way in the gift shop on the way into Bethlehem. These are gifts of great monetary value and gifts that would have been tremendous for Jesus and for his family. And so I guess we have a choice here. We have some different ways we could react. We could react negatively, we could react indifferently, or we could react positively to the birth of Jesus Christ. So I suppose the choice is yours in what way you're going to react, and in the way Jesus might change your life this year, this Christmas, and this lifetime. It's up to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Creating Disciples today. We hope the Lord has blessed you, and we hope you join us again next time.